Thanks for joining us on our streaming service for your First Alert drought forecast. I'm your First Alert meteorologist, Callie Zanandri. And according to the latest drought monitor, about 70% of the state is currently experiencing some level of drought. But here's the good news. Over the past week, parts of eastern Colorado have made big improvements thanks to the recent spring storms. However, western Colorado and southern Colorado, especially near Durango and Grand Junction, are still dealing with severe drought conditions in some locations. Joining us is Stephen Fosnot, a professor of snow hydrology and watershed science from Colorado State University. Now, at the moment, Colorado's snowpack is about half of what it should be, and we're seeing melting much faster than normal. How does this affect the risk or the severity of drought in Colorado?
This is a really interesting year because we had an average snowpack until the middle of April, and then all of a sudden, as you said, it really started to melt quickly. And that water is up in the mountains. That's our big reservoir, and we have a lot less at most of the elevations than we typically do. So there is a big risk of drought this year.
Now, how does melting too fast lead to a higher wildfire potential this summer?
The snow only melts so fast, depending in Colorado on what the sun is doing, and we have a lot of sunny days. But this year it melted a lot faster, so that reservoir of water up in the mountains goes away that much quicker, like it did this year, and as it continues to do. And so we don't have that water in the soil, and that really can be a big risk for wildfire.
Yeah, things just dry out so much more quickly. What other years that you can remember has the snowpack been this slow, this early, and what were those years like in terms of fires?
The 2 years that come to mind are 2002 and 2012, and those were really dry winters. Those were about half the average at peak. This year we were at average, but it melted so quickly. And we go back to 2002, we had the Hayman fire, 2012, we had the High Park fire in northern Colorado, and that's just because the snow went away and we didn't have that water early season, early spring.
Now, is it possible to have a good snowpack year and still be in drought conditions, and why is this?
Yes, we really use that snow as a reservoir, and if that snow melts really quickly, that's the first problem. The second one is, what do we get after the snow starts to melt? So do we get additional snowstorms up high? Do we get rain down low? And if we get some more rain in May or June, that can really help diminish the drought risk. But if we're not getting those spring rains, that can be a big problem.
Now, what is snow drought, and are we seeing this in Colorado?
Snow drought is a relatively new concept that goes beyond the standard drought monitor. And it typically says how much snow do we have compared to the average. What we really need to think of is the snow as a reservoir, and it's not just how much snow is there, but a little bit about what's going to happen in the future. So snow drought is just a measure of how much water we have. And this year, we have the potential to be in drought, be in this snow drought because it melted so quickly.
Now, has there been noticeable trends in snowpack levels in the recent decades?
That's a really interesting question. What we see in the southwestern part of the state, the San Juans, even over to the Sangre de Cristos, is they've been in drought since about 2000. We don't even call it drought anymore because these are the new conditions. What we see down there is a lot drier environment. It's a lot drier over the last 25 years, with some exceptions, such as 2019 was a really big snow year. In the northern part of the state, we see some really interesting things going on. The last 10 years or so, the maximum amount of snow, the April 1st snowpack, has been average. We haven't had any really wet years or really dry years. But what we're seeing over the last 40 years or so is that some of these higher elevation locations, Cameron Pass, Milner Pass, places like that, are actually decreasing. The amount of snow at these high elevations is decreasing, whereas some of these lower elevation places like Copeland Lake on the east side of Rocky Mountain National Park, they're actually getting more snow. And this is going against what we typically think. We typically think when things get warmer, it's down low that really is at risk. What we're seeing is not quite that, so it's a complicated situation.
Going into this summer, how do you think we're going to fare here in Colorado with this very quick snow melt that we've seen?
I am hopeful. I hope that things are not that bad. The snow melted really quickly, especially at those lower and middle elevations. Up high, we're still doing okay, but we really rely on those middle elevations, 9,000 feet or so, and most of that snow has gone away really quickly. The hopeful part are the rains and the snows that we've gotten over the last few weeks. And those are just adding a little bit more water and kind of getting the snowpack to kind of bounce back a little bit. So it really depends on what happens in the next month or so.
Looking ahead, what would you like to see in the next few weeks, next few months, going into spring, going into summer? What would you like to see to make sure this summer we don't see massive wildfires?
We need to continue getting some of those rain events come in. You know, thunderstorms are fine. They tend to be pretty localized, so they often don't give us a lot of water over big areas. They'll give us local flooding potentially, but they don't really help that drought risk. So a few storm events coming through can kind of moderate, can tamp down that risk of drought.
Do you think there's anything people, we talked a little bit about this, the disconnect from people down here in the Denver metro area and up high in the high country with snowpack and how that water is used? Talk a little bit about that.
We live in the Front Range, most of the people here, and we think of the weather conditions, we think of the snow based on what we see down here. Even if you spend a lot of time in the high country skiing, you're not necessarily connecting what's happening, what that looks like. If you go and look at the monitoring, you look at the data, that can give you some insight, but most of us really think about what's happening here and now. So 2012 is a good example where it was really dry in the mountains, but it was a much wetter than average year in the Front Range, and people were thinking, oh, there was a lot of snow. We had a lot of shoveling to do, but it ended up being a really bad year in terms of drought.
Well, thank you so much for all of the information. We will keep our fingers crossed for some more rain and some more snow in the forecast, and you can catch us here next week for your First Alert Drought Report.